On September 29, 2012, Shauna Tiaffay walked into her home. She was coming home alone while her daughter was with her estranged husband. A man was waiting for her inside and attacked. He bludgeoned her to death with a claw hammer. Upon examination, it appeared that Shauna had been hit 17 times. The damage was so bad and she looked so horrific that the family was not allowed to have an open casket. It would just be too traumatic for those attending the funeral. Police investigators were at a loss for a while because they weren't sure what might have caused somebody to want to break into her home and kill her in such a gruesome fashion. At first, police were able to clear the husband's name because he had a solid alibi, but that doesn't mean he didn't hire somebody to murder his ex. Turns out, that's exactly what he did. George Tiaffay had his wife murdered for $5,000. Before we go into the details of this case, we want to take this time to express our deepest condolences to Shauna's family, friends, and especially her daughter who had to deal with such a terrible loss. Shauna Tiaffay was born in Salt Lake City and became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She then moved to Las Vegas when she was 28 years old. The thing that people really loved about her was that she was always smiley and was always really bubbly. She worked as a cocktail waitress at the famous Palms Hotel Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. Many people said that she just loved to laugh at life and she had a beautiful innocence about her. The customers apparently really loved Shauna and she made nearly $100,000 a year with the combination of her wages and her tips. It was there that she initially met her husband, George Tiaffay. They absolutely fell in love. They seemed to do everything together and they just clicked. George was extremely charismatic and handsome. He was the homecoming king and one of the star athletes in high school. He seemed to be perfect. George's family said that he was the all-American boy, and he would send money home to his mother who took care of his disabled sister. His sisters said he was a devoted family man who was always willing to help people out. A year into their relationship, they were able to welcome their sweet daughter Madison into this world. They were in love, and they were so happy about the life they created. A couple of years later, they decided to get married in Hawaii. People said that they were head over heels for each other. Only 2 years into marriage, their life seemed to change a little bit. From the outside, they had it all together. George was a well-liked firefighter, and Shauna was still enjoying her career at Palms Hotel Casino. Both of them were trying to juggle between work, life, and parenthood. Behind closed doors, George would be extremely critical of Shauna and tell her that she dressed like a slut. He would even say these things in front of Madison, which was quite upsetting. Then George started allowing a homeless man to come into their home. He had him do some odd jobs around the house, and it made Shauna feel very uncomfortable. She told George that the man really creeped her out, and she didn't want him around, but George didn't listen. Many of his friends were not surprised that he befriended a homeless man. Apparently, that was something he did quite often. Every Thanksgiving, he would go and serve food to the homeless community. It was just something that he would do. His friends said that he was always just a giving and kind person, always looking for ways to serve. What seemed to be a dream relationship was actually quite strained, and the couple decided to call it quits in April 2012. Shauna moved out and found herself in a cute little townhouse. It was really hard for Shauna to admit that her relationship was over. Nobody wants their marriage to fail, and she really wanted to have that dream life with her husband. It was hard for her to accept that she wasn't going to get that with George and Madison. In early September 2012, Shauna's home in the Summerlin suburb of Las Vegas was broken into. It shook her up quite a bit as she ultimately felt violated and not safe in her own home. Several things were taken, including her wedding ring, and the assailant left behind a pair of small boxer shorts. The police were never able to find who the culprits were, but everybody chalked it up to a couple of rebellious teenagers. On September 29th, Shauna was shown on surveillance leaving the casino at 3 a.m. Her home is about a 30-minute drive, so she left her work and went back home. As she entered her apartment, she was greeted by a strange man who was waiting for her to return. Without any hesitation, he attacked her with a hammer. She did everything she could to defend herself and ended up breaking multiple fingers in an attempt to ward him off. Her defensive maneuvers became futile because he ended up being able to hit 17 times. She died from severe blunt force trauma. He didn't stop swinging until he knew that she was dead. The man quickly fled the scene without leaving behind much evidence to find his whereabouts. There was also no motive for a random attack. George and Madison arrived at the scene a few hours later at about 9 a.m. They walked into the home and were presented with the bloody crime scene. George quickly escorted Madison out of the home and they called 911 to report the crime. Police arrived shortly after and had to start piecing together all of the facts to try to make something of the case. As for most cases, the police initially started looking at George. He was the prime suspect and had the most to gain from the murder of his ex-wife. However, he had a rock-solid alibi that made it impossible for him to have committed the crime. He was at work, and multiple people at his fire station said that he was with them the entire time, and there was no way that he would ever have been able to leave to attack her. He was officially removed from the suspect list. George told the police to start looking back at the burglary that happened a few weeks prior because he was certain that there was some sort of connection between the two. Police officers were not convinced, but weren't going to rule out any possibilities yet. Investigators thought that maybe somebody followed her home from the casino. After looking at the surveillance footage, they realized there was zero indication that somebody followed her home. The attacker must have known her, and he was waiting for her for the sole purpose of brutally murdering her. Although they felt like the only person who had any motivation to kill Shauna was George, they knew that he was not able to commit the crime. Unfortunately, the case went cold and there was no information that led them any closer to the killer. The poor family had to wait helplessly as the police tried to figure out who attacked Shauna. People in the community were really shaken up by the murder. It was such a case for concern because nobody knew why she was killed. All people knew was that a killer was somewhere out there, possibly lurking and waiting for their next victim. Many of Shauna's co-workers were concerned that the killer was targeting casino women, and they were all on edge waiting for police officers to make an arrest in the case. Finally, the case got hot again when the police received an anonymous tip. According to the tip, there was a homeless man by the name of Noel Stevens who was bragging about killing a woman with a hammer. The caller wasn't sure if he was telling the truth or not, but they needed to have the police to have the information. The person told the police that Stevens was incredibly proud of what he had done, and he said it with such a big smile on his face. It was as if he accomplished a lofty mission that awarded him a lot of money. Stevens was saying how he was going to skip town and start a brand new life. The authorities immediately took the tip seriously and began investigating. They were able to locate Noel Stevens. It turned out that Noel Stevens was a handyman who previously had done some jobs for George in the past. Once approached by the police, Stevens confessed that George offered to pay him $5,000 to kill Shauna. Not only that, but George even took Stevens to the local store to buy supplies. This was even backed by video footage. The supplies that were purchased were a hammer, a ski mask, and black clothing. After learning all of this from Stevens, they went to search his campsite where he lived. At Stevens' temporary residence, they found bloody clothing, some of Shauna's possessions, and the hammer that was used to kill Shauna. Although a huge selling point in the murder was the money, Stevens wanted to do George a favor. He idolized George and really looked up to him. He didn't want to disappoint him. George, on the other hand, only asked Stevens because George knew he could manipulate Stevens. Police officers believed that Stevens suffered from low IQ and some sort of mental disability. Stevens pleaded guilty 4 months after the murder, and he was sentenced to 42 years to life in prison. This was after taking a plea deal that made it so he would have to testify against George. George's trial happened in August 2015, and he was found guilty. However, he continues to claim that he was innocent and played no part in the murder of his ex-wife. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. We are very happy that the police received such an important tip. We aren't sure how long it would have taken them to solve the case without the help of this anonymous caller. Although this is a horrible case and we are unbelievably sorry that the family had to go through this, we are glad that the right people were caught and were sentenced for their crimes. Hopefully, people were able to find peace knowing that justice was served. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel and watch our next video.